and welcome to Season 3 of Sustainapod, a youth-led podcast for the youth and anyone passionate about issues related to sustainability in Asia. My name is Chinny, and today I'll be co-hosting this episode with Belinda. Today we'll be talking all about youth engagement and action for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 interlinked goals were set in 2015 by the United Nations and intended to be achieved globally by 2030.
So today we'll be exploring how action for the SDGs are happening locally at the city scale with Genervision House, which is an NGO in Macau working with a community of passionate young people to engage society in knowledge sharing and advocacy about sustainable development. Our special guest for today is Gladys, who I've had the pleasure of hearing from during a very insightful past sharing about sustainable consumption. So Gladys, it's a real privilege to be able to speak with you again, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chinny and Belinda, for inviting me for this podcast. I'm very excited to be on here and share a little bit of my experience as well as my thoughts about localizing or pushing for SDGs actions in local community.
Okay, so Gladys, can you give us a quick introduction of yourself and your role as ESG and Community Project Manager at Genervision House?
Yes, so I was born and raised in Macau, but I left Macau when I was 15, 14-ish. And I went to the States, and then later on I went to Australia for my bachelor degree. So I spent a big chunk of my teenage year overseas, which influenced how I see the world. And I got really interested into sustainability while I was studying overseas. So after I graduated, I went back to Macau and started working in a corporate sustainability department, and also later on got involved in Genervision House as a ESG and community project manager. So I'm very into human geography because my major was environmental studies. So I'm interested in everything about sustainability in cities and in our lives. So that's how I actually started at Genervision House, because I'm really interested in how we could do something more for the city, since it seems like not a lot of people really pay attention at sustainable development or like even the 70 SDGs. So that's how I started. And my role as the ESG and community project manager at Genervision House, I mostly do some online communications, such as on social media. I'll share something about climate change literacy, some basic facts about climate change, as well as a few opinion pieces for some of the local media outlets in Macau to share a little bit about my views about environmental policies and governance and how we're doing as a city compared to the international community. And I also do a lot of workshops in the local community, as well as with our local corporate partners. So we just go in there, we talk to them about the 17 SDGs and also how it relates to our daily lives and what kind of actions we could take, and trying to make it as relatable and relevant as possible to the audience so that they could also start taking up some actions.
Oh yeah, that is actually really interesting, like how your background kind of influenced your engagements at Genervision House. How do you think this developed your personal understanding of the human nature nexus, which is something that I found online that is something you're interested in? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about this concept?
When I started late years of my high school, I became interested in the whole environmental problem. Like, why do we have such a big problem? Because we've been talking about it for many, many years, at least before I was born. But it didn't seem to get any great improvement. I took some classes and then started to understand how our interactions with each other and how we think about the world and how we think about the whole nature, it influences how we treat our planet. And that's the nature and human nexus. And I am always looking at news or other research papers, and that in itself, it's kind of a clue for us to figure out how do we make people care more about climate change. My studies influenced me, and I remember very clearly that there was one time in a college class, and my professor said something like, there's nothing not like unnatural about a city. Everything that we using, the desk we're using, the chair that we're sitting on, even the laptop, the cell phone that we're using, they all came from nature. It just went through a lot of processes that when it got to us, we didn't actually realize, like we didn't think that, oh, it actually came from some part of the environment. It came from other communities. That quote really influenced me a lot. And that got me thinking a lot about how if we are more aware or more conscious of the things that we're using, the lifestyle that we are living, then we might be able to do changes that can make the future better.
That's really insightful. And having studied human geography myself as well for my undergraduate, I can relate and resonate with so much of what you're saying about the human nature nexus, especially in the urban context. I've read articles that people are quite disconnected from nature. For example, like with green spaces, and some children are they grow up in very built up environments. So in terms of going back to what you were saying about workshops in the local community and really making it as relatable and relevant for the audience, what kind of challenges have you encountered in this process of trying to really work on SDGs at the local level, and how have you overcome it?
That's a great question. It's a funny thing because when we were studying in college, we often got this kind of mind-boggling question. Is like, why do humans always have to put a price tag on anything that nature provides? Like when we are talking about reserving a natural area or water body, we have to talk to people about how much value there are. I mean, talking about monetary value, not other intrinsic value. It's just like, how much food it can provide us, how much timber it can provide us, that or how much air it can clean so that we don't have to buy air purifier and stuff like that. So I think that was always a frustrating perspective to me. I see the world as humans are just a species co-living with other species in the planet. But most of the people in today's society don't think like that. They think everything has a price tag. So when we're doing workshop, when I go through all the contents, I have to think about how to make them know that, or make them understand that these things are important. Like, why do we need more green space? Why do we need more park? Why do we need to reserve this specific ant species that you probably will never care about or never see in your life because you live in this high rise? So for example, green spaces, I will dig up some researches and also some local news and then kind of like link the two together, trying to just say that green spaces are great for our health, our wellnesses. And then if we have more green spaces, we might be able to save more money for later on treating our wellness and our health problems. So that is a way that I try to connect audiences with these seemingly lofty goals and also issues. But I'm still trying to explore a better way to also let them know the importance of our natural environment and other sustainability related issues in a not economic or monetary way.
I think that's actually a really good way of linking everyone into it, using more relatable situations and local news, especially since it's known amongst the community. Speaking of local community engagement, I've read that Genervision House wants to advocate a three-pronged approach, which consists of raising awareness, creating a diverse community of like-minded people, and also working with policymakers. And I just wanted to know, why should we approach this holistically instead of just honing in on one focus factor?
Because when our co-founders, Christy and Ariana, when they started Genervision House, they wanted it to be something different than the traditional NGOs or nonprofit organizations in Macau. We call it kind of like a social organization. They didn't want it to be like the traditional ones, and they want it to be a more innovative and also a more comprehensive organization. So that's why we're taking multiple approaches to try to localize or at least push forward the localization of the SDGs, because we can't only work with just one party. For example, a lot of local organizations they get financial support from the government. And so they do think that's kind of like play in the books of the government. They have quite a lot of limitations of how they could approach people and how they could different stakeholders or engage with them in Macau. So with Genervision House taking on these three approaches, we think that it will bring us closer to the goals that we want to achieve. We really want to bring what is happening in the international community into Macau, and also let them know that they also are a part of this community and they can be a part of the solutions. We also want to push for the localization of the SDGs from bottom up. That's why we're also working with the policymakers, and we're just trying to let them know what is happening in the international community and also what the local community thinks and comply to, and let them know that this is suggestions, is what you can do.
It's really ambitious, and I think it's very, very important as well, this localization that you're talking about. So as a young person myself as well, one big kind of topic that comes up a lot, especially in international climate negotiations, is youth engagement in policy making. And that's exactly what you're referring to as well as part of the approach. So what have been key strategies that have been very effective for Genervision House in really bringing together different stakeholders and reconciling often competing or conflicting agendas about sustainable development?
As we were doing all these workshops, is to make it more relevant to people, and even if they don't have a background in sustainability or any of the 17 topics of the SDGs, like we do the almost daily posts on social media. That's one of the strategies to make people get interested into these topics, or at least they could, when they open their phone, they could kind of see it as their daily content, so they will slowly become more aware. That's one of the key strategies. And as these awareness come through, and also against the backdrop of rising awareness for sustainability and climate change, more and more companies and also government are paying attention of what the communities or what their citizens are thinking, what their customers are thinking. So through our first strategies, which is raising awareness, we kind of attract different stakeholders in. And when these people come to us, for example, when companies come to us and ask if we could help them do a SDGs awareness workshop, they will also tell us like what sort of things that they want to be in the workshop. And we can't put everything, just like what you said, Belinda. There are different interests, right? We have our interests. We want to, of course, show them as much as possible. I want to tell them everything about these SDGs because they're really, really important. But for people that don't have a background, when you tell them these things, they don't really get it. Like they even find it boring. So one of the ways that we're trying to solve, for example, if we're doing a SDG awareness workshop for staff members of a company, we'll use some examples from the company. What are the things that they're doing and how are they contributing to sustainable development? We'll show it to the staff members during the workshop and tell them how are you contributing to sustainable development in your work, and kind of in that way make them more aware of it and also become more interested in doing more. And that also satisfy or meet the expectation of that company as a stakeholder, because they don't want everything to be in the slides. They also want it to be something related to their company.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's quite effective, and just really understanding what everyone is trying to get out of it and then trying to tailor as much as possible. One thing that really springs up from this conversation so far is the significance of social media, be it for raising awareness or bringing together a community of like-minded people. And for me personally, throughout high school, like I never really had proper climate education curriculum. So social media in that sense has also been really important for providing information. So I'd love to know from you what you think can happen to improve climate literacy, be it from a topic standpoint, approach standpoint, for young people.
I think one of the things that I'm noticing while I doing all these social media posts is that people at not just young people, I think in general, people nowadays, they are more attracted to videos or things that are snappy and also sharp, like the colors have to be sharp or the titles have to be interesting. So I think one of the things that can happen for climate change education versus sustainability education is that we can make it as these very catchy videos on TikTok or Instagram or on YouTube to make it more fun, like use some slangs that people are using right now. We can use the most recent topics to put into videos to make it relate to sustainability. It's kind of like in our workshops, I always open with some news topics or titles, and then I would try to like relate how everything that is happening in our life, how is that related to sustainable development? Why does that matter? That's, I think, one of an approach that we are also trying to take at Genervision House. I also noticed one of the very popular topics is about career, about your future planning, because a lot of young people, they are more aware of their choice, like how their choices now can affect their future as ever before. At least I wasn't aware of like how my choices then at 13 or 14 would affect my career in the long run. But I think the younger generations right now, they are paying attention. So I think one of the topics that we can use more is about career planning and how just sort of start to introduce them into what kind of courses, what kind of professions that you could practice or consider if you want to go into sustainability. So using that as a topic, I think it will attract a lot of young people.
Yeah, I think career planning and sustainability is a great marketing strategy and way to take this out into the world. And I also actually like how Genervision House is using so many ways to kind of branch out. And I was wondering if you guys had a measurement of how effective what you're doing is, or like how can you see the impact of what you guys are doing?
That is a great question. So in terms of having a quantifiable measures or data, we don't quite use that, but instead we are paying attention to followers and how many people are approaching us for a collaboration, and also the feedback that we receive from our local media partner. That's how we measure our impact, because from the beginning that the Genervision House was established, there wasn't a lot of people that were aware of the SGs, but our whole team have noticed that. So that's so far how we are measuring our impact, is for checking on or paying attention on how many people are following us or how many people are getting in touch with us and telling us we are paying attention to your contents and we would love a collaboration.
That's great, especially increasing the role of like online forms of data analytics will be very important and useful for tracking engagement.
Yes.
And just wanted to also know about the topic of ESG, because that's also been super big more generally. So what do you
Yes.
think are the big misconceptions about this when it comes to local engagement with sustainable development, and how can it be deployed in more effective ways to facilitate this sustainable development transition?
When it comes to ESG, Macau is a very interesting place. You have all these big companies, right? And then you have like so-called SMEs, but they're not big enough to really have the extra money to do ESG. So it's kind of like I always joke about this when I was still in the corporate world, is that besides these big companies, basically no one else in the community really cared about, or like no other companies really cared about ESG, because they don't really have the extra money to do that. So I think that's one of the big misconception, is that ESG is something that you do if only you have the money. If you don't, or like if you don't have big enough support, then you don't have to care about it. I think also another common misconception is ESG is CSR, but in fact there are two separate things, I think. So that's the misconceptions that I noticed in Macau. And how do we deploy that to transition into a more sustainable future. Here's the imagination that I have is for NGOs to work with the local government and ask them to make ESG as a requirement for companies of a certain size. Doesn't have to be like the really big corporate, it can be the medium size, to make it a requirement to do business so that they can also participate in that sphere. And we can also provide tools and trainings for them. So while they are enacting ESG in their business activity, they also get to have the opportunity to work with a bigger company or an international partner in that sense. And because business is a critical part of the economy, and so they are a critical part of sustainable development. So if we are able to make it a requirement, or at least something that every business have to do, then we can use that to start to build a more sustainable society in that sense.
Yeah, I do think making it a requirement will definitely boost it up a lot. And this next question is what your favorite SDG goal is and why this means a lot to you. We just want to know.
Mm-hmm. I have two favorites, but I think they are related. One is SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and also SDG 13, Climate Action. But I think the two should actually be like one, be as one. Like if I can merge them two together, that would be perfect. Because first of all, I am very keen about climate actions. I'm very fascinated by how many people are willing to take the actions or how creative they are in taking this up to the next level. And I think being aware of climate change and also taking climate action for instance in a city is important, is critical to make a city sustainable. And in fact, if you look at the indicators or targets under SDG 11, you will see many that are also related to climate change. So those are the two of my favorite SDGs. These few years, I've been always paying attention at how city can help solve climate change and how city can become more inclusive and accepting and sustainable.
I love that you really highlighted the links because cities honestly have such a huge role to play, given most of the world's population will end up living in cities or being in cities at some point in their life. So the final question for you today is on advice. What advice would you give for young people listening to this podcast that are interested in working in the environmental NGO sector, just getting involved as a young person in local climate action?
I would say don't be deterred by how grand it sounds or like out of touch, right? Right now, as a student, as a young person, you might think, oh, like it might require a lot of professional experiences. It might require a lot of knowledge to participate in climate actions or participate in this particular sector, but you don't have to. You can start right. You could volunteer in any beach cleanup, local environmental protection organizations, or any initiatives, and slowly you'll gain more experience as well as confidence in doing these activities. So yeah, that's the kind of advice that I would also want to give to my younger self if I could. Because back then, I think I was very scared that I did not have the professional experiences to be an expert. Because when I see on TV or even on videos, is that all these experts, right, sitting on a panel at the COP conference, but you don't have to. You know, you just have to pay attention and look around you. You'll see young people everywhere doing important work. And I think if you're really interested in having a career in the environmental protection sector or sustainability sector, you can start where you are. You know, if you don't have that kind of NGO in your local community, start one, right? Just like how our two co-founders started Genervision House.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gladys, for joining us on this podcast today. Really, really enjoyed your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Sustainapod listeners for tuning in this week with us. We would love to hear from you about this episode, so let us know any questions and comments by messaging us on Instagram at @sustainapod_GIH or email us at sustainapod@gmail.com. See you next time.